I stared at the papers in my hands, stunned. Divorce. John wanted a divorce. My husband of 8 years, the man I spent my life trying to perfect. How did we get here? This morning felt so normal. I was ironing his cheap tie, again. I couldn't help myself. "John, don't you care what people think?" I asked, smoothing out the fabric. He just muttered something, kissed my cheek, and left for work. And now, here I was, holding papers he must have planned for weeks. I thought I was helping us all these years, fixing his wardrobe, keeping our life polished. But maybe I'd missed something bigger. Had I pushed him too far? Was I so focused on improving him that I never saw the cracks forming between us? The dinner party was supposed to be perfect. I'd planned every detail. The centerpiece, the wine pairings, even the subtle background music. John's colleagues were gathered around our dining table, and I thought it was my chance to showcase us as the ideal couple. But somewhere between serving the roast and refilling wine glasses, I started slipping. When someone asked about John's work, I chimed in, "Oh, John's so talented, if only he aimed higher, right?" A few polite chuckles followed, and I took it as encouragement. I kept going. His salary, his lack of ambition, even the way he hesitated to take risks. I told myself I was being supportive, that I was lighting a fire under him. But as the night wore on, the energy in the room shifted. John grew quieter, his colleagues glanced at their plates, and the air thickened with discomfort. By the time the last guest left, John wouldn't even look at me. I thought I was helping, motivating him to be better, but now I wasn't so sure. Had I crossed a line I didn't even see? The word divorce hung in the air, sharper than any argument we'd ever had. It came after a simple discussion about our finances, something we'd done 100 times before. But this time, John looked at me differently, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard. "I can't do this anymore, Linda," he said. I was speechless, furious. How dare he? My long-suffering husband, who'd let me take the reins for years, was suddenly standing up to me, shaking the very foundation of the life I'd worked so hard to build. Now I'm lying here, staring at the ceiling, hearing him shuffle around in the guest room. My jaw clenches every time I think of it. He's ruining everything, our image, our life, my carefully constructed world. How could he just decide to walk away, as if none of it mattered? When I found out John had been confiding in Mike, it felt like another betrayal. What could he possibly be saying? That I'm controlling? Ungrateful? I needed to act fast. I called Mike's wife, Sarah, under the guise of friendly concern. "I just don't know what's gotten into John lately," I said, my voice carefully composed. I thought maybe Mike could help him see reason. Sarah sounded sympathetic but non-committal. I could tell she wasn't fully on my side yet. No matter, I had a plan. This wasn't just about saving my marriage, it was about controlling the narrative. John wasn't going to paint me as the villain without a fight. As I sat down to map out my next moves, I felt a flicker of determination. If John thought he could leave me this easily, he didn't know me at all. As word of the divorce began to spread, I knew I had to tell my side of the story. People needed to understand the truth, or at least my truth. John didn't marry me by accident. I captivated him, plain and simple. My beauty, my charm, the way I could command a room. He was lucky to have me, and I made sure everyone knew it. But no one saw the shadows behind my perfection. I grew up in chaos, constantly overlooked and left to fend for myself. That's why I crave control, why I demand perfection. It's not vanity, it's survival. I built this life for us, polished and pristine, and instead of appreciating it, John is throwing it away. He doesn't see the effort, the sacrifices. He thinks he's making a bold move, but he's making a massive mistake. And I won't let the world think otherwise. If John wanted a fight, I'd give him one. I hired the most aggressive divorce lawyer in town, the kind with a reputation for leaving opponents in shreds. Every tactic was on the table. Delays, endless paperwork, inflated costs. Whatever it took to make him feel the weight of his decision. This wasn't just about winning. It was about making John understand the consequences of crossing me. As we strategized, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. He thought he could walk away from me without repercussions? He was about to learn just how wrong he was. John was gaining support, and it infuriated me. His sister Sarah was firmly in his corner, and even his colleagues seemed to rally around him. It was as if they'd all bought into his narrative, painting him as the victim. I couldn't let that happen. I doubled down, slipping subtle reminders into conversations about John's lack of ambition, his bad decisions, and the countless ways I had propped him up over the years. People needed to see the truth, or at least the version of it that kept me in control. Isolating John had worked before, and I was determined it would work again. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about maintaining my place at the center of everything. Living under the same roof as John during the divorce was unbearable, so I found ways to make it more tolerable. I redecorated extravagantly, new furniture, expensive accents, and ran up the bills without hesitation. If he wanted out, he could foot the cost of leaving. One night, during yet another argument, things got heated. He was clutching some old sentimental trinket, a small, ugly thing I'd always hated. Before I knew it, my hand lashed out, and the item hit the floor, shattering into pieces. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt as John stared at the fragments, but I quickly buried it. He needed to understand that this wasn't going to be easy for him. Not by a long shot. If John wanted a war, I was more than willing to play dirty. I started spreading whispers about his supposed infidelity, slipping the rumors into the right ears. Anonymous calls to his boss followed, accusations of misconduct that I knew would plant just enough doubt. The fallout was immediate. I heard his work performance was slipping, and while part of me felt a flicker of guilt, I brushed it aside. This was about survival, about showing him that leaving me came with consequences. I became meticulous, careful not to leave a trail. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. John's life was unraveling, and I wasn't about to let him walk away unscathed. When I found out about Rachel, something inside me snapped. John had been spending time with her, a woman from some support group he'd joined. It was infuriating. He wanted out of our marriage, yet the thought of him turning to someone else made my blood boil. Jealousy clawed at me, irrational and all-consuming. What did she have that I didn't? I told myself she was just a rebound, a way for him to play the victim. But deep down, I couldn't shake the rage or the sting of rejection. I became obsessed with making him regret this, consumed by the need to regain control. Even as I recognized how irrational my feelings were, I couldn't stop myself. If he thought he could replace me, he was sorely mistaken. The secret account was my safety net, my escape plan if everything fell apart. But during the proceedings, it was exposed, laid bare for everyone to see. Panic surged through me as I realized I'd lost my last shred of security. John's lawyer pounced on it, and I felt the walls closing in. Desperate, I lashed out. "If you don't drop this," I hissed at John during a private moment, "I don't know what I'll do to myself." The threat hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. But even as I said it, I felt my control slipping further away. Everything I had worked to hold together was crumbling, and I was grasping at straws, struggling to regain the upper hand. The harder I tried, the further out of reach it seemed. Mediation was supposed to be my chance to turn things around. I came prepared, armed with every manipulation tactic I knew. I played the victim, painted myself as the devoted wife, even shed a few well-timed tears. But nothing worked. John remained calm, composed, a version of him I barely recognized. Every time I tried to twist the narrative, the mediator gently redirected, and I felt the ground slipping from under me. Frustration boiled over. "You've ruined my life!" I spat at John, my voice echoing in the sterile room. Before anyone could respond, I stormed out, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. I couldn't let them see me break. Not like this. I made sure everyone saw me. On his arm, in the finest restaurants, wearing my brightest smile, I played the part of the perfectly content woman who had moved on. The wealthy businessman I'd met recently was my ticket to reclaiming the narrative, and I flaunted my apparent happiness at every opportunity. It wasn't about him, though. It was about John. I wanted him to see what he was losing, to realize he couldn't survive without me. Surely seeing me thrive would shake him, make him question his decision. But behind the public facade, I was watching, waiting, hoping for a reaction. I needed him to regret everything, to understand that I wasn't someone you walked away from. Despite everything I'd done, John was thriving. It didn't make sense. He was supposed to falter without me, to realize how much he needed me. Instead, he seemed more confident, more self-assured, as if leaving me had freed him somehow. It was infuriating. Every step he took forward felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that my efforts were failing. I couldn't stand it. I spent sleepless nights plotting, desperately searching for a way to bring him back under my control. He wasn't supposed to outgrow me. I wasn't ready to lose the power I'd held over him. But the harder I tried, the more he slipped through my fingers, and I didn't know how to stop it. Everything was falling apart. My new boyfriend, my carefully curated symbol of moving on, was arrested for fraud, and the whispers around town grew louder. My perfect facade was cracking, and for the first time, I felt truly lost. In desperation, I reached out to John, hoping for some semblance of the stability I once had. "We can fix this," I pleaded, tears spilling over. But he stood firm, his eyes filled with a calm resolve I couldn't shake. I stumbled home, hollow and shaken. For the first time, I couldn't spin the narrative, couldn't control the outcome. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was beginning to wonder if this chaos was my own doing. I couldn't believe it. John was thriving without me. He was excelling at work, his confidence growing with each success. Even his social life was blossoming, with new friends and connections I'd never seen him capable of making before. Each of his achievements felt like a dagger, a personal slight against me. How could he be so happy, so functional after everything? Wasn't he supposed to falter to realize how much he needed me? I was struggling to cope with this new reality, one where I wasn't the center of his world. Watching him rebuild himself, piece by piece, only reminded me of how broken I felt, and I didn't know how to deal with that. In court, I threw everything I had at him. Tears, emotional appeals, subtle digs meant to paint him in a bad light. But none of it worked. John remained calm, composed, and infuriatingly steady. The more he held his ground, the more I felt my own veneer cracking. My voice grew sharper, my gestures more frantic. I could feel the room shifting, their eyes on me, not with sympathy, but with judgment. It was slipping away, all of it. My control, my carefully crafted image, gone. I stumbled through the rest of the hearing, desperately trying to regain footing, but the harder I fought, the further I fell. The judge's verdict hit me like a physical blow. Half of my hidden account, gone. The house, gone. John had won, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I sat there in stunned silence as the gavel came down, signaling the end of everything I'd built. My carefully constructed world, the life I'd controlled so meticulously, was crumbling around me. For the first time, I felt completely untethered, staring into a future I couldn't predict or control. The thought was suffocating, and I didn't know where to begin picking up the pieces. Packing my things from our former home felt surreal, like dismantling the life we'd built piece by piece. I moved through the rooms mechanically, avoiding the memories tied to each one. John was there, quiet but polite, helping where he could. As I was about to leave, we had a surprisingly civil conversation. Brief, but genuine. For a moment, I saw glimpses of the man I first fell in love with, the one I'd forgotten somewhere along the way. When I walked out the door for the last time, I was left with a tangled mix of emotions, regret, sadness, maybe even hope, but I couldn't quite name them, and that unsettled me more than anything else. 6 months after the divorce, I was still struggling to adjust. The silence in my new apartment was deafening, and my once busy life felt empty and directionless. I heard through the grapevine that John was doing well, better than well. His career was flourishing, and he was dating Rachel now. The thought of them together made my chest tighten, though I tried to convince myself I was better off without him. But the loneliness was suffocating. I found myself replaying the past, questioning the choices I'd made and the person I'd become. For the first time, I wondered if I'd brought this on myself, and the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. A year after the divorce, I decided it was time for a fresh start. Moving to another state felt like the only way to leave the past behind. As I packed, I couldn't help but reflect on my life with John, the good moments, the bad, and everything in between. In a rare moment of honesty, I sat down and wrote him a letter. It was filled with admissions I'd never spoken aloud, regrets, apologies, and truths I could barely face. I knew I'd never send it, but putting the words on paper felt strangely freeing. As I sealed the letter and tucked it away, I wondered if I could truly change. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I'd spent my life building something real or just walls to hide behind. The uncertainty lingered, but so did a flicker of hope. In my new life, away from the remnants of my old one, I finally began to confront the hard truths about myself. There was no one left to blame, no distractions to hide behind. I reflected on my childhood, the way neglect shaped me, and how it seeped into my marriage. I saw with painful clarity how I'd treated John and others, how I'd hurt them in my desperate need for control and validation. For the first time, I felt genuine remorse. It wasn't fleeting or performative, it was real and it cut deep. But I realized this pain was necessary, a step toward something better. Growth was slow and messy, but maybe for once I was on the right path. I took a solo trip to a quiet beach town, craving a break from the pressures of my old life. The rhythm of the waves and the stillness of the mornings gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I let myself try things just for me. Painting, kayaking, even sitting quietly with a book. Each small experience felt like rediscovering a part of myself I'd buried long ago in the pursuit of perfection. It was terrifying to confront how much of me had been lost to the image I'd tried so hard to maintain, but at the same time, it was freeing. I wasn't sure who I was yet, but for once, I was excited to find out. Joining a support group was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Sitting in a circle of strangers, sharing pieces of my life, was humbling and deeply uncomfortable. At first, I wanted to walk away, to avoid the vulnerability and the shame, but I stayed. Slowly, I began to see patterns in my behavior, to understand the roots of my need for control and perfection. I couldn't ignore the damage I'd caused, to others and to myself. It wasn't easy, but each meeting brought a small step forward. For the first time, I was starting to imagine the person I wanted to become, and how I might get there. As I neared the second year of my new life, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. Letting go of the need for constant control had been one of my greatest challenges, but it was also my greatest achievement. For the first time, I was beginning to see value in myself beyond appearances or perfection. I wasn't the person I wanted to be yet, but I wasn't who I used to be either, and that was enough for now. The road ahead was still daunting, but a glimmer of hope had taken root. I could create a better life, not just for myself, but for those I might let into it. The thought scared me, but it also made me feel something I hadn't in a long time. Excited for the future,